and welcome. I'm Tafara Gidamo. Ethiopian Airlines, the biggest government-owned investment in this country, continues to dominate the African aviation business. And in the next 10 plus years, it hopes to double its fleet size and increase its revenue to $65 billion US. But how is that possible with the stiff competition coming from all sides? My guest today, Kaleyesus Bekele, has closely observed the industry for close to 2 decades. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So Ethiopian has added in the last, including this week, it has added 3 routes?
Yes. They launched they resumed
one to Karachi.
Flight to Karachi, Pakistan, which they suspended 20 years ago in 2003. And this week, Ethiopian again, they will inaugurate a new flight service to Atlanta. As you know, Ethiopian, they serve 3-4 destinations in the North America, including Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, and Toronto. Actually, they had flights to L.A., Los Angeles.
What's the rationale behind canceling that?
Houston was suspended due to COVID pandemic.
But what about Los Angeles? There was supposed to be quite a market out there.
A long route. So from commercial, it was suspended for commercial reasons. Addis is a very high altitude city. So aircraft consumes more fuel when they take off from high altitude city like Addis. Even aircraft manufacturers like Airbus, they prefer to have a high altitude test in Addis because of the altitude. So, Tafara, you have been to the US many times. So when you travel from Addis, the aircraft has to refuel somewhere in Dublin, either in Dublin or in Lome in West Africa. Otherwise, any aircraft so far cannot make it all the way to the US. But when on the return flight, of course, from Washington, D.C., for instance, it can directly come to Addis. So now, L.A. has been a very challenging route commercially, where the market was developing, they were developing the market, but from technical point of view, having an aircraft with a capacity to travel all the way to Los Angeles with all the fuel load has been a challenge for the air.
But what about the long-haul aircrafts?
Well, even they tried the Dreamliners 777s. It didn't work, but I believe that somehow they are evaluating maybe the 777X. I don't know. Somehow I hope they will resume the flight to L.A.
So Ethiopian Airlines currently owns something like 144 aircraft?
Aircraft, yes.
144?
Yes.
So, and only a few years ago they've started adding the Airbus.
The A350-900, yes. Ethiopian, they for centuries, like for the past 60 years, Boeing has dominated Ethiopian Airlines fleet. Ethiopian has been operating for the past 6 decades on the long-haul and for the long-haul flights, Boeing aircraft. But as the airline, having a single type of aircraft has its own economical values, benefits, because,
maintenance,
staff training, maintenance, and engineering department, But as the airline grows, the management decided to have a mixed fleet. And of course,
what was the rationale behind that decision?
For instance, you remember when Ethiopian was the third airline in the world to acquire and operate the Dreamliner, the Boeing 787. And there were some challenges with the Dreamliner when it was introduced. Then the Dreamliner was grounded. All the Dreamliner aircraft were grounded. They had these battery issues, the lithium battery issues and so on. So
I remember there were a crew of technicians from Boeing visiting Ethiopia to be able to tackle those problems.
That's right. Yeah. So, and then if you have an Airbus aircraft, then you can operate those aircraft. When one manufacturer has a difficulty in providing spares and some other problems, technical issues, you can operate the other type of aircraft. So the Dreamliner, it was not only with the battery that they had issues with the Dreamliner, but there was a time with the Rolls-Royce engines, the Dreamliners powered by Rolls-Royce engines, they had problem with the engine blade. So at that time, all the Dreamliner aircraft powered by Rolls-Royce engines were grounded until they got those engines maintained. At that time, the Dreamliners powered by G engines, they were operating, and Airbus, the A350, played a great role at that time when some of the Dreamliners were grounded. So having a mixed fleet is, as you grow, but if you are a small airline, you better have one type of aircraft.
Ethiopian Airlines is the leading company in the African continent, right, in this sector?
Yes, that's true. According to IATA, the International Air Transport Association, I follow up their report every time. And I have also the privilege to visit their headquarters once in every year in Geneva. So in 2014, Ethiopian for the first time became the most profitable airline in Africa, according to the IATA report. So now, Ethiopian is no more only an airline. It's an aviation group comprising like 8 different profit centers, like Ethiopian MRO, the Maintenance and Engineering Department, Ethiopian Catering, Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics, Ethiopian Ground Handling Services, Ethiopian, the international airline, Ethiopian, and the regional Ethiopian. So there are about 8. And now you have the Ethiopian Skylight Hotel. So it's the largest aviation group. Now they incorporated the Ethiopian airports as well. So it's the largest aviation group in Africa with they transport like 12 million passengers per year, and their annual revenue is more than $4 billion, and they serve 130 destinations on 5 continents. So it's by far, it's not only the largest aviation group in Africa, but now, some...
So all these eight departments that you just mentioned contribute their own share to the profit Ethiopian Airlines secures every year?
That's true.
So is there any one or two that don't make sense, economically speaking?
You very well know about the Vision 2025, which the management of Ethiopian Airlines came up with a 15-year growth strategy.
Right.
And they started it in 2010. Before that, they have this Vision 2010, a 5-year growth strategy between 2005 and 2010. And then the biggest one that really made a difference in the history of Ethiopian Airlines, you can call it a milestone, was Vision 2025. Yes. That totally transformed Ethiopian from a small airline with 20, 30 aircraft to an aviation group. So in that vision, they clearly stated that they follow a diversified business model. So having different businesses, entities. So that is what saved Ethiopian Airlines during the
all
pandemic.
This is the pandemic, exactly, yes. Particularly the cargo, yes.
Yes. At that time, about 94% of Ethiopian passenger planes were grounded. And it was the cargo, Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics, which generated the much-needed revenue and saved the airline. And, of course, Ethiopian Skylight, too, contributed its share. Even if there were not passengers traveling, they used that as a quarantine center, and generated revenue, foreign currency.
Tell me about the partnerships that Ethiopian Airlines has been forging with a number of African carriers, right? We have three. Ethiopian now has three hubs. One is the Askai Lome in West Africa. There is the Malawi.
In Mozambique, too, and in Zambia recently. And there are some ongoing negotiations, and agreement has been signed in DRC, in Congo.
But it didn't take off the ground as yet.
It didn't take off yet, yes.
So are these hubs making sense? I know of Askai, which has been the first hub outside of Addis Ababa, right? And it is making economic sense.
Yes, Askai is a successful startup airline because in the past 2 years, Askai has been profitable. And it's connecting West African and Central African countries. Sometimes there were times when you fly from some West African country all the way to Paris, transit us.
And get back to the continent.
And back to West Africa again. So Askai solved that problem, connecting the West African and Central African countries. And now Askai is feeding some passengers to Ethiopian. Ethiopian has a flight to the U.S. Via Lome. And Ethiopian also feeds passengers to Askai. So it's a successful startup airline.
How about the Zambia, the Lusaka?
The Zambia airline, it was recently became operational. Malawi is not as successful as Askai, but still it's operating and it's profitable now. I think the Mozambique one didn't also work out well because of the business environment of that country.
So is that a wrong business decision?
No,
in the first place,
businesses that you start always they don't turn out to be successful. But the multi-hub strategy is the right strategy to go about because, maybe we will talk about it later, but more giant airlines, carriers from the Middle East and other part of the world are coming to Africa and dominating African skies. So to withstand this competition, you need to have a multi-hub, a couple of hubs.
You're right. You'll come back to that point later on in the program. But now Ethiopian Airlines has a 49% stake at Malawi Airlines, right?
Yes.
45% from Zambia Airlines.
That's correct.
49% the Chadia Airlines.
Yes, I think they have stopped the operation in Chad and
did they?
Mozambique.
So for Mozambique Airlines, it was 99%, but it no longer is.
Yeah.
But it's also entered into some kind of partnership with Air Nigeria, right?
That's correct.
They signed it, didn't they, for 49% stake, the largest shareholder, the Nigeria Airways?
Yes, you are right. The Nigerian government, they floated an international tender, and Ethiopian participated in the bid, and the Nigerian government selected Ethiopian Airlines as a strategic airline to reestablish the national carrier of Nigeria. So as you know, after the demise of the Nigeria Airways, such an economic giant, Nigeria, unfortunately,
couldn't run its own airlines.
They don't have a national carrier. They have a huge population. They have a huge economy. They are oil exporting country, but unfortunately, they don't have a national carrier. So the Nigerian government selected Ethiopian as a strategic partner to reestablish the national carrier of Nigeria. After that, unfortunately, the private operators of Nigeria, they protested that decision and they took the case to court. So it's now under court litigation.
It's interesting. Shouldn't Ethiopian Airlines have taken the lead in creating some kind of partnership of that sort with Rwanda Air?
That's right.
Because its current board chair, Girma Wake, was also board chair of Rwanda Air, right?
That's right. And when Ato Girma Wake was the board chairman of Rwanda Air, and the CEO of Rwanda Air was at that time John Mirenge, and of course the chief marketing officer of Rwanda Air was an Ethiopian also, Michael Governor, who unfortunately passed 2 years ago. And then at that time, there were negotiations between, Ato Girma was not only the board chairman of Rwanda Air, but he was also advisor to the transport minister of Rwanda on aviation matters. So there were discussions and negotiations with Ethiopian, the management of Ethiopian Airlines. And then finally, they signed an MOU, which I attended the signing ceremony. But later on, for undisclosed reasons, the government of Rwanda, they changed their mind and invited Qatar Airways Group.
That's why I raised it, because you earlier were trying to allude to the fact that the challenges to Ethiopian Airlines and other African carriers come from what? The Middle East? Yes. Airlines based in the Middle East, right? Out of the Middle East?
And Turkish.
And Turkish Airways. Because as we speak, Qatar Airways now owns what? 49% of Air Rwanda?
Yes.
Rwanda,
they are investing.
And they're investing on a 1.3 to anywhere between 1.3 to $2 billion
airport
in creating this new airport in the Kigali International Airport.
Yes. They are building a new modern hub airport out of Kigali. And Rwanda, the Qatar Airways, they are investing on the airport infrastructure development. So they own a stake on the airport. And they also,
Qatar Airways.
Yes, Qatar Airways. And they are also investing on the airline. So that's going to be tough for Ethiopian. Ethiopian is now 78 years old airline with a rich experience. So they are not new to competition. They have been competing with Middle East carriers like Emirates, Qatar, and Etihad. But it's not going to be easy. But Ethiopian Airlines was the first airline to connect West Africa with East Africa in the 1960s. They have very good knowledge of African market.
But these Middle Eastern carriers come with a very solid financial muscle.
You are right, and they are dumping capacity. They have hundreds of aircraft, so they dump capacity, and they offer lower fares. And once they wipe out African struggling airlines out of the market, they will revise the ticket fares. So they also have that strategy. But so far, Ethiopian has been successful.
So far, but is it well positioned to be able to survive the challenges coming out of these airlines? Because airlines from the continent.
Ethiopian, they have more than 60 destinations in Africa. The second largest network goes to Turkish Airlines, which has more than 50 destinations. So Ethiopian dominates African sky. But Ethiopian is now successful not only in Africa, but if you see Ethiopian today, they fly to as far as, in Latin America, in Brazil, Sao Paulo, and in Argentina. And they fly to 6 destinations in North America. They fly to Tokyo, Narita International Airport. They have about 5 destinations in China. They fly 3-4 destinations in India. And they have about 20 destinations in Europe. So now they are winning the competition, not only in Africa, but in other continents too. So if we take during the COVID, Tafara, when most giant airlines, European airlines, were grounded, Ethiopian transported the much needed all the protective clothing and the ventilator. And then they were transporting, Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics was transporting this much needed life-saving materials all the way from China throughout the world, like to European countries, Italy, Spain. It was Ethiopian, even to Latin American countries. Of course, within 11 days, they distributed all the donations coming from the Jack Ma Foundation and Alibaba Foundation. It took them only 11 days to distribute all those materials for 54 African countries. Okay, so they were beating the competition. Let me tell you one incident. What happened was the Brazilian government, they bought that equipment from China and chartered an airline, a cargo airline, to transport those equipment to Brazil. So the aircraft landed in Miami to refuel, and then at that moment, those equipment were taken. Then what the Brazilian government did was, so many people were dying at that time in New York and in Brazil, Sao Paulo, in the Rio de Janeiro as well. So the Brazilian government, they chartered Ethiopian cargo. So Ethiopian operated the flight. They flew all the way from China, refueled in Addis, and directly they flew to transport those goods to Brazil. You see? So they beat many giant airlines at that time. So I'm optimistic that Ethiopian would continue with its success story.
It's interesting, but there is also a possibility, even if that would be remote, like big airlines, European airlines like Alitalia, I remember.
Yes.
They filed for bankruptcy and so on. Do you think this is something that Ethiopian Airlines would have to think about well in advance? You never know.
Yeah, but the management of Ethiopian Airlines, they have very cost-prudent management. And they have a clear vision. Like we were talking about the Vision 2025. Now they have revised that and they came up
35.
with Vision 2035. So they have clearly set up their goals and they know where they are heading. And well in advance, they forecast and predict what would happen in the coming 10 years, you see. So they are capable of handling all the challenges, including competition.
Prudence is interesting, but isn't that one of the reasons for the migration of Ethiopian Airlines, for example, pilots who are basically paid handsomely by airlines carriers from outside of the continent?
Ethiopian Airlines, the management of Ethiopian Airlines, they have been making salary increments and adjustment to its staff. And it's not only about making salary adjustment, but there are, staff retention. There is a staff retention program. Like they are building residential houses. As you know, in Addis, the most challenging problem, pressing issue is a housing problem. And now they are building, constructing apartments and residential houses for their employees so that, somehow they try to maintain their staff. But it's difficult and impossible to totally stop the migration and the brain drain. Because if you take the Middle East countries, for instance, if you take Dubai, they don't tax. They don't collect income tax for a foreign pilot who works with Emirates.
Quite an incentive, yes.
As an incentive. So that is a challenge. And the challenge is there not only for Ethiopian Airlines, but it's all over the world.
I'd like you to reflect on the single African air transport market. That was part of the Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Where does it stand today?
First, the African heads of state in 1988, they signed an agreement to liberalize the African skies for African airlines, and it's called the Yamoussoukro decision. And then, so the whole idea was to allow African countries that would enable the restrictive bilateral air service agreements, and it would grant all African carriers to freely fly and operate in the African skies. But that unfortunately didn't materialize. So again, the African Union and the AFCAC, African Civil Aviation Commission, they came up with the SATM, Single Air Transport Market. So it's like a replica of the Open Skies Agreement of Europe and the US. So it was enacted in 2018, at the Heads of African States Summit, but still the African countries are reluctant to fully implement it. But the irony here is that African countries, they deny traffic rights for African carriers, and they allow non-African airlines to fly in. You see, that is very ironical. So the fear is they fear that their small airline, national airline, will collapse if they allow other African carriers.
So what do you think is the way out of this?
I have read a study conducted by IATA, which indicates the benefits of SATM. IATA is an association of 300 airlines, and they indicated in the study, the benefits of SATM, and implementing it would transform African economy. It stimulates the tourism sector, the hotel sector, hotel and tourism sector, and creates jobs. There is a saying that when you open like one job in the aviation industry, that will translate to creating 5 other jobs in the tourism and hotel industry, you see. So IATA indicated all the benefits of SATM, but still African countries are reluctant. So now the African Civil Aviation Commission, AFCAC, they have started a new initiative. They are organizing road shows, having discussions with each African government to create awareness. They did it a couple of weeks ago. They did it in Nigeria. And last week, they held a road show here in Addis Ababa with the Ethiopian Civil Aviation Commission. So the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines, I attended the meeting, and the CEO of Ethiopian Airlines, Masfantazo, he said he gave his consent to the Ethiopian Civil Aviation authorities to open Ethiopian skies for all African airlines. So this should be reciprocated with, other African countries should follow suit.
Thank you so much, Kaleyesus. It was a pleasure having you on my show.
Thank you, Tavara, for having me.